It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
The time is just gone 8:34 a.m. We continue this morning, and we're going across to be joined by Ebrahim Deen, researcher, Afro Middle East Centre. We're talking about the heads of state of the Southern African Development Community, the SADC, and they have met and condemned the African Union's decision to grant observer status to Israel. Ibrahim, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jummah Mubarak to you.
Jummah wa alaikum assalam.
Yes, wonderful that you are able to join us. Now, this is quite significant in terms of this meeting of the Southern African Development Community. Now, they met to discuss economic cooperation in the face of COVID-19 pandemic and also other issues about regional insecurity. But the issue of Israel obviously has come out in this meeting, and this is quite significant, Ibrahim.
It is significant in the sense that the issue of the statement that there's opposition to move, it's not necessarily going to make much of a difference because continentally the balance of forces has shifted. And so, yes, it's not a surprise that you get the SADC region opposing it. You may get Algeria opposing it. You may get maybe Egypt saying something. But many other countries on the continent, including West Africa and Central Africa, are actually quite supportive of the move. And so, the bigger issue is actually trying to hold these countries, to their decisions.
Yes. Now, what is also important to understand is the Southern African Development Community in relation to the African Union. Now, the fact of the matter is they have expressed concern. They have objected to the unilateral decision taken by the AU Commission. Now, where does this actually leave the SADC in relation to the African Union, and particularly when we're talking about certain actions or decisions that are taken by the AU?
See, yes, it depends on whether or not and when on the AU's PSC, or whether or not and when they have the rotating presidency of the African Union, which is now not there. And generally, you do get a regional bloc votes in the institutions. But, in saying so, at the end of the day, the African Union, yes, the hegemons control, the dominant states control the blocs. And, in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, similar to in relation to Morocco, the SADC was very strongly opposed to the move, the re-accession of Morocco into the Institute was actually a much bigger move, and actually had a vote. And the SADC, as I said, unfortunately, the bigger issue is that Israel has been able to cultivate this economic and security ties with much of the continent. And that's actually meant that many of these countries, many of the other countries have supported. Now, in terms of the SADC, the big issue may be other countries that, like for example, Zambia, that may support the move, but also be pushed back by the SADC when taking a block start. Whether that's going to be enough is a different story.
Yes. Now, also, I think just looking at the AU, and obviously they are defending their position. They are defending the decision that they had taken. And at the end of the day, talking about the position of the majority of member states who had basically supported this move. Now, this obviously is also an important, aspect that one needs to look at in terms of trying to defend their position based on, principles of majority and what the majority decision is, Ibrahim.
Yes, the idea is to actually oppose the move by actually arguing that much of the EU's decisions are based on consensus. And that this is not necessarily a consensual decision because there is opposition to it. But they use charter and the EU's, founding documents and practices do allow for voting. And, we do know that, there were ulterior motives behind providing Israel observer status in the Union. You just look at the country who did so, and, the political conditions inside the country that it took shared. But, in saying so, ever since Netanyahu, Israel was able to use specifically security guys, but also economic guys as a leverage to actually try and wiggle its way back into the institution.
Yes.
And on the court.
Yes, interesting. We speak about leveraging and how Israel has obviously used its position, and we've seen it obviously in terms of the relationships that they've built with some of the African countries and countries like Chad, Guinea, Sudan, Morocco, and also Egypt normalizing relations with Israel from the African continent. But at the same time, what is also important to note that, despite this, the AU still maintains a position talking about an unflinching commitment of the Pan-African Organization to the fundamental rights of the Palestinian people. Now, obviously, how does one actually look at these issues? Because on the one side, you're talking about committing to the Palestinian cause. On the other side, you're doing the direct opposite by including Israel through observer status.
It is a fundamental disconnect between, the organizational charter and states. But, in terms of real policy, the African Union also has very good aspirations about popular representation and popular participation and, a democratic representation where much of the countries of the African Union, or many of the countries, are still ruled by dictators, Chad, for example. The African Union also does argue that Western Sahara is, or still believe or adhere to the point that Western Sahara is the last colonial outpost on the continent, but has acceded to Morocco. So, the problem between the EU, it has very good goals, very good aspirations, but as an institute, it's controlled by the states, and because it doesn't, unlike the EU, where there's some nationalism and supra sovereignty, which is given up to the institute, which can rule against it. It's very difficult to implement these aspirations. Now, as I said, if it was me, I would focus on, or try to focus on, the states that have rejected the move and actually ask them or see if they actually abide by the move that they have rejected. Because many of these states do still have relations with Israel, but are opposing Israel being granted observer status in the Union. So there is also, again, a double speak, because they can make the statement without having to face the real consequences.
Yes, and Ibrahim, just looking at Israel, and obviously the facts of the matter speaks for itself, where Israel is basically gloating at this decision to the extent that they've made a statement, and the Israel Minister of Foreign Affairs has made the statement saying this is a day of celebration for Israel-Africa relations, and obviously they've been looking at acceptance for a very, very long time, and also in terms of Israel's foreign relations to accept Israel for what it is.
Yes, they've, there's different parts where they've rewritten the history to argue that African states in Israel were fighting against colonialism. So yes, they have, been gloating about this decision. And it's a culmination of the, specifically Netanyahu's presidency. So it's one of the successes they have had. It's African countries. Security assistance has been quite significant. Economic assistance, and many African countries, especially under Donald Trump, believe that having relations with Israel would allow them to have good relations with the U.S. Sudan, for example, part of the reason for the normalization was that they'd get off the sanctions list. It is a big coup for Israel, especially because splitting the African vote, which now will have some say in, when it is discussed, and can have some access to discussions on the African Union as an observer member.
Ibrahim, Jazakallah khairan so much for that and for your time with us this morning here on Assalam Media. We wish you all the best. Have yourself a wonderful Jummah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You too. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Researcher, Afro Middle East Centre, AMEC this morning, Ebrahim Deen with us.